it's sinking at an alarming rate. So what's it going to take to save Venice? Hello, I'm Adir Depitan, and this week I'm in one of the most instantly recognisable cities in the whole world. But doesn't it seem like news of flooding here in Venice is becoming more and more regular? Well, stick with us, because in just a moment I'm going to see the giant floodgates that some people here want to slam shut. Also this week, we take a trip back through time on the beautiful rivers of Myanmar. Our thirsty explorers in India on the hunt for a lovely cup of tea.
Gritty.
And I hope you've got a head for heights. We've got cliff divers and skyscrapers in our global guide. But first, I'm in Venice. It's a beautiful and romantic place, in no small part thanks to the canals the city's famous for. But these days it's a bit wetter than many would like. Just 2 days before this year's carnival, bad weather and high tides brought a familiar sight back to Venice. The flooding returned, and so did the wooden boards that seem to be appearing with increasing regularity. One of the lowest lying and most frequently flooded areas also happens to be the city's most iconic, St. Mark's Square. For tourists, the waters are a novelty, but restoration works have been forced on both the Basilica and the Campanile bell tower here after water damage. It's hard to believe that during bad weather, this whole square has been flooded. I mean, it's massive. And during high tide, the levels reach up to 1 metre high. So businesses like this have to constantly think about how to protect themselves from the floodwater. Café Lavina's been on the square since the mid-18th century. The composer Richard Wagner used to wet his whistle here every afternoon. It's got pedigree, but it's also got a big problem with flooding. How often does it flood? How many times a year?
Last year was more than 60 times.
60? More than 60 times?
More than 60 times, yes.
Do you think the flooding is worse now than it was before?
Yes, a little bit worse, yes. Because it's more often. 2 and 3 years ago, I saw a lot of people that swimming on the square. They undressed and everything.
Massimo's tipped off about future flooding events on his smartphone.
With the color is green is normal.
So it's 13 centimeters
now.
Now, yeah.
Okay.
And when the alarm finally sounds and there's no other option, he heads out the back to prepare the storm doors. They're heavy as well, really heavy. And so
I told you before about when the level was very high, the high for here, 10 centimeters and the water's coming up.
The problem is caused partly by bad weather and fluctuating tides, but also subsidence means that Venice is slowly sinking. When you take into account climate change and rising sea levels, the future looks bleak. But lurking beneath the lagoon, there may be an answer. The Moses Project, a vast chain of barriers protecting the ancient city from the sea. Moses isn't due to open until 2017, but here in the control room, there's hope that Venice can be saved. Has Venice reached a point where you feel it's in danger?
In the beginning of the century, there was 1 flood a year. Now, San Marco Square is flooded 200 times.
Wow.
Venice is so close to the main sea level that any storm is enough to flood the city. So there is an exponential increase in the number of flooding of the city and deterioration of the structure of the city.
Is this the only way? Were there any other options that you could have done?
The other option to save Venice,
yes,
to retreat, to abandon the city or to transform the lagoon into a lake and use pumping, but that will be a big violence to the natural processes.
There are 3 inlets in Venice Lagoon that the Moses project seeks to shore up as and when needed. When there's a tidal surge or a storm, compressed air is pumped into the barriers installed in the seabed, which lift and act as a dam. Alberto Vitucci has been writing about the Moses project for the best part of 30 years.
When I was young, I came here to fishing.
This artificial island was created to help the underwater construction effort. It'll be torn down once the barriers are functional, but Alberto thinks the damage has been done.
In this place where we are now, they excavated almost 6 million tons of sand of the lagoon, and they put 6 million tons of cement.
6 million tons?
Yes, and this is a work that will remain here forever.
Venice is having massive problems with floods, and it needs something like Moses.
But yes, there is a problem with flood, but the sea level is going to grow in the next year. I'm not sure that the Moses is the right solution. We cannot close the Moses every day, and we have to think to put another kind of life in this lagoon, with not engine, not big ships, too big ships, not too many tourists. This is the future of Venice.
But for the time being, Moses is all that stands between Venetians and oblivion. And it could be what lies in store for many more of us. Already Japan and Boston in the United States are casting admiring glances in its direction as they too attempt to save their vulnerable coastlines from the encroaching seas. But if you're planning on spending some time here in the near future, you are going to love it. And these are some of the things you need to know. Be prepared to get lost. The streets seem to have been built with far too many twists, turns and dead ends, but enjoy it. Build in extra time to discover new streets, tucked away squares, cafes and little shops. Venice is a city of bridges, more than 400 in fact, which mean a lot of steps and not much fun if you're in a wheelchair. Navigating the city is just about doable, but you won't find many hotels with accessible rooms. You can get around leisurely on a gondola or hire a water taxi, but it's cheaper to use the water buses. It's probably worth thinking about a day pass rather than single tickets. Also worth noting that you may not need to use transport all that often. It's a compact city, so your best bet may be walking. And here's our tip for saving money in what is a very expensive city. In cafes and bars, keep in mind that it's often cheaper to eat or drink standing up. Sitting can be up to 2 or 3 times more expensive, depending on where you are. So do like the Venetians and stay at the counter. The latest from our Thirsty Explorer next. This week, we're bound for India.
During the British Raj, tea plantations throughout India supplied the leaves needed for UK's classic afternoon ritual. But it wasn't long before Indians made tea their own, adding extra milk, more sugar, and often spices, creating what is now known the world over as chai. Proper chai may start in British-founded plantations, but it takes work to turn the leaves into the drink that's at the center of virtually any social activity and important discussion. For an authentic cup, I took the train to Varanasi, one of the oldest cities on earth and the holiest for Hindus, where virtually every aspect of making chai is done in the traditional way. I am more scared of them than they are of me. That feels like real milk. Ginger. Gritty. Good one. Good one, no? Yeah.
Travel update time now. First up, a record-breaking attempt to fly around the world in a solar-powered plane has got underway from Abu Dhabi. The Solar Impulse 2 took off heading east to Muscat in Oman. Over the next 5 months, its journey will span continents, crossing both the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. 2 Swiss pilots, Bertrand Piccard and André Borschberg, will take turns at the controls. Rome's Colosseum has once again been vandalised. 2 tourists were caught carving their initials into the ancient amphitheatre. The pair had slipped away from their tour group and carved an 8cm J and N before taking selfies with them. The women may now go in front of a judge and face a penalty. In the south of Bulgaria last week, snowfall reached 1.5 meters. Thousands had no electricity or access to food and water. Finally to Magaluf, where tourists are set to be banned from drinking on the streets under new proposals being introduced from May the 1st. Police will have the power to seize drinks from tourists on the streets between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. There will also be severe restrictions placed on pub crawls and how they're publicised. Still to come on this week's travel show, we're on the rivers of Southeast Asia, floating through a country most of us know very little about. The Travel Show, your essential guide wherever you're heading.
Hello, I'm Michelle Yana-Chan, your global guide, with top tips on the world's best events in the coming month. There's cliff diving in Cartagena and some serious skiers in the Arctic Circle. But first, in the UK, the city of Lincoln is commemorating, well, no less than 800 years of democracy. The reason, the Magna Carta, meaning the Great Charter, was issued by King John of England in the year 1215, which established for the first time the principle that everybody, including the king, was subject to the law.
Et fidelibus suis salutem.
On April 1st, Lincoln Castle will open a subterranean vault containing one of the 4 original documents. There'll be some resonance across the Atlantic in New York City in the US when the much-anticipated One World Observatory opens, the observation deck at the mighty One World Trade Center. The steel spire atop the skyscraper reaches 1,776 feet, making reference to the year the United States Declaration of Independence was signed. It's properly skyscraping. Think 6 statues of Liberty stacked up. Visitors are whisked up 100 stories in 60 seconds in glass elevators to learn about the history of the construction of the building and the city around them on all sides.
We're 1,000 miles from comfort. We have traveled land and sea.
It might just be the world's toughest cross-country ski race, The 3-day Arctic Circle race is a 160-kilometre contest, 65 kilometres north of the Arctic Circle. Taking place in and around Sisimiut on the west coast of Greenland, it's stunning wilderness but very mountainous terrain, and the weather can be brutal. For 3 days, from March 20th to 22nd, competitors will be camping out, overnighting in sleeping bags. It's a do-it-yourself race that's open to all. Well, anyone in great shape and with stamina in spades. There'll be legendary surfers carving it up at Victoria's famous Bells Beach from April 1st through 12th. The Rip Curl Pro is one of the world's most prestigious professional surfing contests in Australia's surfing home of Torquay. The World Tour's best surfers and a few wildcards will compete, including some junior talent. Bells Beach is renowned for its booming swells and its natural amphitheatre shape on the Great Southern Ocean.
Will your mouth still remember the taste of my love?
In contrast, there'll be 400-year-old art on show in Antwerp, Belgium, where the Rubens House will be holding an exhibition of Peter Paul Rubens' family portraits. Fascinatingly, these paintings were never intended for public display, and these intimate renditions offer a tender glimpse of Rubens' personal life. There'll also be guided tours and workshops around the exhibition. Rubens in Private runs from March 28th through June 28th.
Found love right where we are.
On April 25th, they'll be making a splash in Cartagena, Colombia, at the International Red Bull Cliff Diving World Series. The location, the colossal cliffs of Villafranca do Campo on the island of São Miguel, where the world's best will take the plunge from 27 metres up. That's my global guide this month. Let me know what's happening in the place where you live or where you love. We're on email and across social media. Until next time, happy travelling.
Finally this week, we're in Myanmar. It was pretty difficult to get into until recently, but now more of us are able to get our hands on a visa. And those lucky travellers are treated to a landscape undisturbed and utterly pristine. We sent Karen Bowerman on one of the boats taking growing numbers of tourists on a trip back through time.
To many, Myanmar, cut off from the world for decades, is more associated with headlines than holidays. But for adventurous travellers, it's a country steeped in tradition and religion, and one that still offers an authentic travel experience. It's home to a people who are heartfelt, warm and welcoming, even though many have lived most of their lives under a harsh military regime, accused of widespread corruption and extreme human rights abuse.
I'm in tourism. I was chairman of the World Travel and Tourism Council. We preach that tourism changes countries. It changes countries. It creates employment. It actually brings about a change. So to discourage people coming to Myanmar will be discouraging the fate of the people here.
Tourists may be keen to visit, but it's not easy. There are few direct flights except from Asia, and although you can now apply for an e-visa, it's not valid for entry at every airport. Travelling independently is also a challenge. Hotel rooms are scarce and costly, and public transport's poor. Buses are frequently packed and often don't run to schedule. Trains are slow, unreliable, and can be delayed by hours. Which is why, perhaps, a lot can be said for travelling the way many locals do, along the main river, the Ayeyarwady. I set sail to Bagan from Mandalay. The Ayeyarwady is the lifeblood of Myanmar and its commercial waterway. As we follow it south, we seem to sail back in time. We moor on a sandy beach, where I'm invited to try out the local transport.
And this is how people travel here, by taxi. Well, it's a bit bumpy, but it's great fun.
Oxen are a lot more than taxis. They transport teak, plough fields, and are cheaper than tractors. They're a reminder, too, of how little has changed here. Admittedly, the internet's available, albeit patchy, in a handful of cities, but there's still no mobile phone signal for outsiders. We journey on and call next at Sin Kyun, a remote village accessible only by boat. It's as if we stumbled across Asia of old. The settlement has no electricity or running water. Homes are built on stilts, with livestock kept below. Visitors here are a novelty. Children accompany my fellow travellers down the main street. It's a dirt track that's shared with passing oxen. We sail on towards Amarapura. There, as dusk approaches, I join locals and tourists for a stroll across Ubain Bridge. Built in 1847, it's the longest teak bridge in the world, snaking just over a kilometre across Lake Tauntamen. But it seems the motives of the man behind it were far from honourable.
The bridge was built by the mayor, who was asked to build it by the king. But the mayor used the money he was given to his own advantage. He built the bridge, crossed the lake, and tried to kill the king in his palace.
He didn't succeed and is said to have paid with his life. But the bridge was named after him nonetheless. Today, local boatmen are embracing the opportunities tourism is starting to bring. They row visitors to the centre of the lake for sunset. It's a spectacular sight, one which just decades ago few outsiders would have seen. But now the growing interest in Myanmar is a sign to the people here that the world hasn't forgotten them.
Well, sadly, that's all from us this week. But coming up next week, Krista heads for the home of the theme park, Florida.
There you go.
Yes! And finds out why its latest offering might not be one for the kids. Join us for that if you can. And in the meantime, remember you can follow us wherever we are by signing up to our social media feeds. The details should be on your screens. But for now, from me, Adia Depitan, and all the travel show team here in Venice, Italy, it's goodbye.